Hello everyone, this is part 2 of my video to try to explain what the hell is going on Discovery, how the ship is built, which is not going to be easy. So this will not be an exact scale, it will just be a demonstration of roughly how I think is the only way to explain what the hell is going on. So this is the middle of the saucer section, this is the first ring, this is the second ring, this is all very roughly. This is the drive section, roughly like this. There's this kind of bridge. This is very roughly, not an exact scale. This is not as big, this is more flat and it's longer, and the nacelles I'm not drawing because they will just block the view. So we have the shuttle bay somewhere here. We have a place under the shuttle bay where they had those pods in which they used in the beginning of season 2, which was apparently under the floor somewhere. So there's this rotating part of the floor that goes down, and there are those 4 pods which go through the tubes, and then they all connect to one tube and they go outside. We saw that in the beginning of season 2. The warp core is, I suppose, somewhere here because we saw it being ejected in the end of this season, and so it's supposed to be somewhere here, I guess. And we need to find a place for the giant empty space where all the turbolifts are flying. Now, I know I said in the previous part maybe they're using that compressed space technology that we saw in Enterprise, and I said that's the only way to explain it, but it doesn't explain the previous seasons. And so I'm going to start by talking about the previous season in which they couldn't have yet had this technology. So where could that giant space possibly be on the ship? The only explanation is that it's somewhere here. And mostly here, because here it gets kind of narrow, but here it's both wide and tall, and so it can only be somewhere here. Now, in the start of season 2, we saw Captain Pike arriving to the Discovery through a transporter beam, and then he and his team walk through some kind of corridor, and then there's a window on top of that corridor, and they look up and they see that same exact giant empty space that we also later see in the end of the season during the battle scene, and it all breaks down and falls and breaks that window. And in that same time we see Michael and Spock, who just finished constructing the Red Angel suit in the spore box room, and they're now going to the shuttle bay with it, and on the route they pass under that small window, and the stuff falls on them from that giant empty space. And so the only way I think we can explain that is by saying that the transporter room is somewhere here. TR, that's transporter room. I think it kind of makes sense for it to be in the bottom of the ship because, you know, you have to send the beam down to planets, and so it might make sense for it to be in the bottom here. I guess it's somewhere sideways, it's not directly behind them because we see a small window in that same corridor that they're walking, and that's why I left this little place empty, because here there's a window from which they can see space. And so they're walking in this corridor here, and here they see this window, and they look up and they see the giant empty space somewhere above, and it seems to be so big that it goes even behind that window. And so I'm guessing I didn't draw it right. It would have to be something like this, and the window is here, and then they walk and they see the giant empty space, which seems to start even from before the window. And so it's not an exact drawing I made here, but the giant empty space begins even before that. And in the end of the season they built the Red Angel suit in the spore room, and so I'm guessing it might be somewhere here. It might make sense for it to be close to the deflector dish, maybe it's somehow connected, you know, with engineering and all of that, even though the warp core is down here. And we also know there's that big room where they grew all those fungus and all of that, so I guess it's somewhere close by. So anyway, they built the Red Angel suit, and then they're walking through a corridor heading for the shuttle bay. And then they also pass under that window from which stuff falls on them in the end of the season. And so it must be the same corridor that Pike used when he first arrived to the ship, before he went into a turbolift and then went all the way to the bridge. And so that's why I'm guessing the giant empty space must be somewhere here, and goes all the way to the saucer and connects with it somewhere here. And the turbolift that Pike takes seems to take this kind of route. So it might explain why we see his turbolift going through like a roller coaster and not in a direct line, because it has to do this curve to get to the saucer section, and so that's the only way I can possibly explain it. And so he passed under that window, the same one we saw in the end of the season, when Michael and her team were going with the Red Angel suit to the shuttle bay, and so Pike passes under the same window before he goes to the turbolift here to go to the bridge. Now we can say maybe the transport room wasn't really here, maybe it's somewhere else entirely, and he simply wanted to do an inspection of the ship first before he went to the bridge, something like that, but he was in mid-sentence, he was explaining to them why he came and all of that, so it couldn't have been that long from the moment we saw him arriving to the moment we saw him in the corridor, and so that's why I insist that the transport room has to be somewhere here. And it's the only place where we can fit that giant turbolift space in the ship. It means that it takes like a big chunk of the middle of the ship is full of flying turbolifts with a lot of empty space for some reason, and so this is this giant empty space that I'm talking about with all the turbolifts. It's all of this middle part of the ship. And we can say it connects with the saucer somewhere here, and maybe that's the place where Michael and Book got into it in the end of season 3. And I said before, it doesn't really fit with the dialogue of the episode because they were saying that there is no life support below deck 5, and yet they were apparently on deck 7 or 8, and then they went down into that giant empty void, assuming it's all in the same place as in season 2. And so what happened with the life support? Did they turn it back on? If so, how come Tilly and her team were still suffocating while Michael and Book and all those regulators chasing them were not suffocating? And so maybe it's because they entered this giant empty space which had a lot of spare air. But if that's the case, how come Tilly and her team didn't even try to get in there? How come Michael was able to get in there but they couldn't? Was it locked off? I can explain that maybe it got locked off, but how can Michael get into it while Tilly cannot? Is Michael so much smarter that she can open a door that no one else can? It's a simple door. Couldn't they use a bomb to get in there and to get all the air they need? Maybe between scenes Osyra turned the life support back on in those specific spots where her regulators were chasing Michael and Book. Maybe it's because Michael somehow magically got into this area which Tilly somehow couldn't get into, and that's why they were able to breathe. And then Michael jumps down somewhere from here. She jumps down on a turbolift and then starts flying, I'm guessing here. And then Book also gets on another turbolift and also starts flying. And then Michael reroutes the turbolift and I guess flies. She continues to fly, we don't see it turning around, so it continues flying straight until it gets to the data core. So I'm guessing maybe the data core is somewhere here, because we see the turbolift flying into a much more narrow space right before it arrives, and so I'm guessing that's the path she took. So first she gets into this giant empty void, then she jumps down a few levels, catches a turbolift, then it starts flying and it starts forming those things as it's flying, and then she changes its course, continues flying until she gets into the data core, and I guess Osyra beamed there because she was there waiting for her somehow. And meanwhile Book continues fighting that guy, I guess on the other turbolift, and I guess he also continues going here until he kicks that guy off and he falls 20 levels down to his death, and we don't see that little window anymore. Maybe they closed it off, maybe it was somewhere here. So that guy falls down and hits it here, and so I guess it's possible. It doesn't seem very logical, especially in the beginning, because we see a very wide shot right away, and as I said before, this part of the ship is really narrow. If you look at it from above, it's a really narrow part of the ship, so how come did it have so much space on the sides? But this is the only part of the ship where it can possibly fit something even close to what we saw in that scene, if we dismiss any kind of magical technology. So the big question remains is how come Tilly and her team never tried to get in there to get some air? Are you really telling me that with all those flying turbolifts in there, there are no more access points that Tilly could get into, that only Michael could open it from this one place, from this one door, and that the rest of it was completely sealed off from the ship, and that no air was leaking, and they couldn't get in there to breathe from any part of the ship? And Tilly's journey is also really funny, because it started out somewhere, I guess, in the saucer section. They were trying to get to the bridge. Then all the regulators retreated to the top 5 levels and shut off life support everywhere else. And then Tilly and her team went all the way down, I guess, from here to the spore box room. because that's where they were regrouping and planning their next move, while Michael was still somewhere in the saucer section. And also in one scene she was in a Jeffries tube, the one when she ejected people out into space, and that guy said that she's on deck 5, and yet when we see her ejecting that woman regulator out into space, it looked as if it's somewhere in the drive section, and yet he said that she's on deck 5, which doesn't really make sense. I guess maybe it was somewhere here, I don't know, because we see her flying out somewhere here. Then Michael got captured, brought to sickbay, then she and Book escape, and then they go into the giant empty void, and then Michael goes all the way here to the computer core to restart the ship, and once she does, she has complete control of the ship. She immediately tells the computer to restore life support and to beam all the regulators off the ship, I presume into empty space. So she killed all of them, she beamed them out into space, and retook the ship immediately. So why didn't she do it from the start? I mean, she arrived with Book through the shuttle bay. She and Book crash landed his ship into the shuttle bay. It's somewhere here. Everything here is burning. That might explain why Tilly and her team didn't try to get into a shuttle here or something, because this whole place was on fire, so I can accept that. But the computer core must be so close by, so why didn't Michael simply go there immediately? Why first she went to the saucer section, I guess to try to get to the bridge, and she was in the Jeffries tubes here and all of that. Why didn't she simply go here immediately? She was close by. She crash landed here in the shuttle bay, and instead of immediately going to the computer core to retake the ship and to beam everyone out, instead she tried to get to the bridge and then went all the way back, all this convoluted path through the giant empty void to get there again. So you started out here, why didn't you go here right away? And also, why didn't you sabotage the warp core right away? Later she tells Tilly's team, go and sabotage the nacelle, but she was somewhere close by to where the warp core was, so why not pull the dilithium out? Why not sabotage the warp core or eject it or something? Just shoot a phaser at it, just disable the warp core right away. Instead, she didn't do any of this. She tried to do something somewhere here, I guess. And also remember, she told the admiral to let her go, to let the ship go. For some reason, I guess because she was so confident that she would be able to defeat Osara all by herself. She didn't need all the help of the rest of Starfleet and the Vulcans, and so she just told the admiral, oh, allow us to go, I will deal with it myself. So the ship went on its way with Osara. Then Michael gets captured, and it's a miracle she just isn't executed on the spot, and then Osara would have won, and then she would have the Discovery's technology and all of that, and then she would defeat the Federation. So it's a pretty big gamble that Michael took, just based on her own overconfidence that she's going to win by herself. So she gets captured, brought to sickbay, then she escapes with Book, and then goes into the giant empty space. And also right before this, she somehow lets Tilly know that she wants her to sabotage the nacelle. And Tilly and her team are somewhere here in the spore box room, and then they go to the nacelle, which I guess the access point is somewhere here, we can say, somewhere here, and they don't have enough time to get there. So why didn't they stop at the transporter room? How come there are no EV suits anywhere that they can use to get oxygen? Why didn't they try to get into the giant empty void to get some air? So why not go into that place where they grew the fungus? Shouldn't that room have a lot of air? And they were right next to it, and so they only have one gas mask, and there is no more masks in the entire ship as they went through the entire ship, which is also very funny. So they all try to get to the nacelle to sabotage it. So again, how come Michael didn't do it from the start? Michael started out from here, from Book's ship, and the nacelle is somewhere close by. So why didn't she sabotage the nacelle by herself right away? And also think about what did it actually accomplish. Like, we know that Osira's ship picked them up immediately and swallowed up the Discovery and could have continued escaping at warp, and so it didn't actually help Starfleet catch up to them. Maybe only a little bit because they had to stop for a moment, but what did that actually accomplish when the fleet didn't end up actually doing anything? They didn't fire a single shot at Osira's ship, and Michael blew it up on her own in the end, and so all of this plan was pointless. So the fact that Tilly was sent to sabotage the nacelle to slow the ship down only ended up forcing Osira's ship to pick them up, and I guess that enabled them to blow them up. But are you telling me that was Michael's plan all along, that she's such a genius that she planned to blow up that ship from the inside from the get-go, and that's why she sent Tilly to the nacelle? Wouldn't it be more clever to tell Tilly to go into the computer control room where she was going so that they can retake the ship. Isn't that the most important thing? Because once she did that, she could beam all the enemies out immediately. So why not send Tilly there? In fact, that is where they were planning to go right before they got sent to the nacelle by Michael. They were planning to go to the computer control room to restart it, to retake the ship. So isn't that more logical to do than just blow up the nacelle? Because once they retake the ship, they don't have to do that. They can simply set a new course and simply escape in a different direction, do a U-turn and go to Starfleet. But once they sabotage the nacelles, they couldn't even do that. They get picked up by a Sarah's ship and cannot escape. So that was a very stupid plan. So if Michael didn't say anything to Tilly, then Tilly and her team would have gone to the computer control room anyway. And then Michael could have met them there and they would fight Osara together more easily and all of that. And so this entire plot line doesn't really make any tactical sense if you think about it. So it was all on the go, it was all by pure luck that they even won, and it's all thanks to Osara's kindness that she didn't simply execute all of them at any point. She was very gentle with them, she kept telling all her men not to kill any of them, and she could have killed all of them at so many opportunities and didn't, and only thanks to this and to the sheer luck of all of this mess that they even won in the end. And so that's why I find all of this kind of funny. And as for the ship size, the fact that what we see in the inside of the turbolift void cannot possibly fit into the ship as we see it from the outside, there is no real way to explain this unless we say that the ship is actually much bigger than it appears on the outside, and maybe every time in all those scenes we see someone standing at a window, and that gives us a rough estimate of how big the ship is. Maybe all the windows on the ship are actually like magnifying lenses, that actually the window from the inside is much smaller. Maybe there are more decks in between the decks we see from the outside, and maybe every time we see someone from outside the ship, it's actually through a magnifying glass of the window, and maybe even the force field in the back of the ship also magnifies it, because we see people here, we see the sizes of the people in the shuttle bay from the outside, and from the inside we see how big the shuttle bay is, and so that also gives us a rough estimate of how many levels there are. I would say no more than it appears like it's 5 levels based on what we see from the outside and the inside. So maybe the shuttle bay doesn't actually take as much part of the ship as it appears to from the outside, because maybe the force field is just like the windows is like a magnifying glass, and maybe the ship is actually bigger than it appears. It definitely would have explained how come they had the space for all those tubes under the floor, which also doesn't seem possible from the outside. I kind of gave it a very generous addition of space that shouldn't be possible, but I'm being generous today. And also that window I mentioned, that has to be on some extra deck under here, somewhere here I guess, which we don't really see from the outside. And so that's the only way to explain that maybe all the windows are actually made from magnifying glasses, and there are more decks than what we see from the outside on the inside. Maybe between each deck where people are walking, there are extra decks where all those machines are flying around. All those droids and all of that are in between decks, and there are actually many more decks than what we presume to be based on the windows we see from the outside, which are all magnifying lenses. That's the only way to explain it without using that excuse of some place on the ship being made with TARDIS technology being bigger on the inside than the outside. And this drawing isn't up to scale, so I will add some bit of the saucers to make it a little more closer to how it looks like. And we had plenty of scenes of people standing next to windows. We had Lorca on the bridge in season 1. We saw Tilly and Michael running through a corridor in between the rings of the saucer, and it looks as if we can visibly see them running. So it's like one corridor. That's the size of one corridor of a few meters long, and so that gives us a rough estimate of how big the ship is, and yet it cannot possibly fit what we saw. So that must mean every window we ever saw someone standing in must be a magnifying lens. That's the only way to explain any of this. And also the ship has to have some room for all those extra shuttles that we saw in the end of season 2, because apparently they had 200 shuttles somewhere. So there must be even more empty spaces on the ship where they store a whole bunch of stuff that they can pull out of the ship whenever they need. And so maybe somewhere here, maybe there are extra spaces for shuttles, maybe around the shuttle bay, above the shuttle bay. There must be a lot of empty spaces that we didn't even see. So I think I pretty much covered everything in the best way I possibly could have. I tried really hard to come up with a schematic that would explain everything we saw in those various episodes I mentioned. And there is no other way to explain it except for saying it's magic and we have some magical chamber with infinite amount of space. That's what I suggested in my previous video. I said that maybe somewhere here, maybe there is some place in the middle of the saucer where Michael goes into and it has the giant empty space, and that's why Tilly couldn't get to it, and that's why it still had life support, because it was above deck 5. Maybe deck 5 in the middle of the saucer had that giant chamber with all the turbolifts and the data core and all of that, and that's why Tilly couldn't get to it. And so that's the only way, because why couldn't they simply go there? Why did they go to the nacelle and not where Michael was going herself? So why did Michael have to go there and not Tilly and her team? And it made, the way they talked about it, it made it sound as if they will have to fight their way in there, as if it is in the saucer section. So that's why none of this makes any sense, and this is my best attempt to try to make any kind of sense of it, and it's still self-contradictory in so many ways. So to summarize, when we saw Michael and Book enter the giant empty space, it must have been somewhere here. They said they were on deck 8, those regulators said it, so I'm guessing maybe they were turning the life support back on in all the places they were going, and that's why none of them were suffocating. Or maybe they put on those gadgets that give them air, even though we didn't see that, but maybe they were all wearing ones. Maybe Michael and Book got ones from his ship when they left his ship. Maybe they put some of that on their bodies. Maybe it's because they injected adrenaline. We know that Michael injected it into Book. She gave him something to boost him up. Maybe that's why he's not suffocating. And Michael doesn't need anything because she's Michael. She's all powerful, so she can be without oxygen, without problems, because she's the bestest ever at everything. And so she goes all the way here to take over the ship. So let's just summarize again, just for the kicks. So she and Book arrive to the shuttle bay. They crash here. They have the data core right here. They have the nacelle here. They have the warp core here. But instead of doing anything with any of these places, instead they go all the way to the saucer section to try to do something. Then they get captured. At some point Michael is brought to the bridge. Then she is taken to sickbay where Book is tortured. And instead of asking Book for the information, they ask Michael to talk with him. So because her talking to him would have a bigger effect than torturing him somehow, because she's Michael. And then they both escape somehow, and they go, I guess, here, and they enter the giant empty void. Michael jumps down a few levels down. I guess maybe gravity is skewed here. Maybe it all goes here. Maybe it's even sideways. Like it's a starship. I guess it's possible. Maybe when they're falling, they're actually falling here and not down. I guess it's possible. So anyway, Michael jumps on the turbolift, then she flies all the way back here where she started. So why did she need to make all this journey to the saucer section at all? And meanwhile, Book is fighting that guy in the turbolift for 10 minutes, and so I'm guessing maybe that turbolift was flying in circles, maybe, you know, because he didn't take it over yet, so maybe it was just flying in circles there, and that's why the fight took forever. And at some point, that guy falls down 20 levels and crashes, I guess, somewhere here. And then we don't really see Book again. And meanwhile, Michael is fighting Osira here. And meanwhile, she sent Tilly and her team to sabotage the nacelles. And the nacelles are here. I'm running out of color. So the nacelle is somewhere here. And Mrs. T blows it up. And that slows the ship down. And then it gets captured by the much bigger ship, which they later blow up. So really nice plan, Michael, really well done. You really deserve the captaincy after all of this mess, which worked somehow miraculously by pure luck and because of the stupidity of Osira, who didn't execute any of these guys at all of these different points when she could have. So really excellent, really that's all I can say. So this was my best attempt to make sense of all of this mess. Let me know what you think and we can continue discussing it in the comment section below. And I will see you all next time. Bye bye.